Constellation Network is probably the most promising cryptocurrency currently out there, and that is no exaggeration, guys. I'm not here to show you Constellation. As a matter of fact, I'm a large critic, but I'm also here to give you the most objective point of view possible. So along with the promising aspects of Constellation, there is also some very large red flags that we're going to briefly discuss today. However, I want to say for the most part, this is a TLDR video. The video that's going to actually explain all of this in a lot more detail is coming in about a week or two, so stay tuned for that. But first of all, to say Constellation is so promising, it must obviously have to solve a pretty big issue, right? Well, it does. It's trying to solve the current issues plaguing big data. So big data roughly translates to around 2.5 billion gigabytes of data a day. So that's between networks such as legacy networks like banks, for example, that have ledgers. That's like cryptocurrency, for example, all the networks in such. That's also things like enterprise grade networks, Quarter Quorum, and Hyperledger Fabric. These obviously are blockchain as a service for big companies like JP Morgan and stuff like that. We also have, fintech. We also have IoT. We have microservices. My God, guys, there's so much out there. And of course, the internet itself, Google, is a big player in that regard as well. So essentially, we're talking about massive amounts of data being processed from anything that simply blockchains and current systems aren't able to adequately, interoperate with. It's very, very hard for us to be able to fathom a network that can, or especially a blockchain that can process 2.5 billion gigabytes of data per day. That's not transactions, that's data, okay? When sometimes we're talking about transactions being about 10 bytes in size, so you can kind of get the gravity of the situation. So remember, current systems are inadequate. We don't really have a way that we can kind of have a middleman or a spider between the web of all these networks that is able to facilitate seamless transfers. Now we do have HGTP, which is like, a way that a client can interact with a server to obviously transact so-called securely across the internet to load websites or whatever it may be. However, I must say, as secure it may tell you it is, it really isn't, because at the end of the day, big corporations like Google, for example, are scraping your information and creating what are called avatars, or just digital profiles that have your hobbies and habits listed on a big list, and they're selling these avatars to advertisers and things like that for immense amounts of profits when we're simply left with nothing, right? And that's why we get sort of like when we talk about certain things in our everyday lives, dog treats, dog treats, dog treats, we get ads on Google for dog treats, okay? So this is a big, big situation. And of course, HTTP has its flaws. It's not doing an adequate job. We have these siloed networks. Crypto is a really big one, and crypto is supposed to be Web3, right? Yet we can't even really connect with real world systems, and Oracle's obviously highly unsecure and inadequate. So we're missing something, right? We're really missing the interconnection link, and that is Constellation, right? Constellation, again, is poising itself to become the solution to this issue and be able to manage this big data issue. And I think once it's fully implemented, if it's ever fully implemented, we'll be looking back on the current times going, how the hell did we survive? Because as seamless as some systems may seem to be, trust me, they are highly siloed and aren't seamless whatsoever, okay? You just think about transferring something from your bank, aka a legacy network, to another legacy network, to a different bank, how many days or sometimes weeks that takes, and sometimes, I've worked in a bank in my previous jobs, sometimes those transactions go missing as well. Very bad. Constellation solving that problem, okay, which is currently isn't being able to be solved with blockchains, just simple as that. So how does this all work? Well, it all works very simply from the HGTP protocol, or Hypergraph Transfer Protocol, and you might find some similarities here with HTTP and HGTP because, yes, the Hypergraph Transfer Protocol is looking to replace HTTP and more, okay? So it's the how it all works from the framework, right? So the Hypergraph itself, which is the layer 0 on the HGTP protocol, and it's a DLT itself, right? So it's not a blockchain, it's not a DAG, it's not a hash graph, it's a hypergraph created by Constellation's team, and it's super powerful. It doesn't resemble a blockchain, doesn't resemble a hash graph, it resembles more so a DAG structure. So the way that DAG is different to a blockchain, there's so many things I could mention here. So I've got a good video on LF0 you can watch up here that kind of goes over the differences, but more or less it allows information to process more freely and faster, so it can obviously keep up with the high demand, the big data demand. But the hypergraph isn't a DAG. While it resembles a DAG, it is not. It's far more powerful, and what it actually does is allow for DAGs to be able to run within it itself, okay? So I'm going to use an example, right? So we know Polkadot. Most of us should know it has a relay chain, and we have parachains that can connect to the relay chain and, you know, interoperate with each other through different protocols like XCM and so on and so forth. Well, the hypergraph is kind of like the relay chain, except being, of course, it's not a blockchain. It's a DAG sort of structure, again, a hypergraph. And it runs DAGs within it, aka parachains, but they're not called parachains. Obviously, they're called state channels. So a state channel like a parachain, businesses can come on, leverage, boot up, and of course interconnect with the layer 0, therefore other state channels as well. And state channels are really, really awesome because the way they actually work, and I'm not going to go into the technicals because I know you guys aren't here for that, is they employ what are called cells, which initially is what kind of starstruck me to Constellation initially. So it's like a cell is essentially a group of nodes within it that is specifically able to read information or data coming within one side, apply what's called business logic or specific information the business or the state channel wants it to have, and then runs consensus on it and spits out a block that is a readable format for the next cell. And this process just continues and continues until arbitrary information, let's just say it's from like an IoT sensor in the real world, is put through these sort of layers until it gets to the very end or the base layer of a state channel, where it can then settle upon the hypergraph and then be read by any other state channel, right? So it's incredible because now, like, long gone are the days of oracles, long gone are the days of sort of any interoperability measure. We now have a way to take any data and transfer it to the very, very end and, you know, seamlessly transact around to other state channels, okay? So it kind of works with what's called the L0 token standard. So it's just a token standard that enables like that end result to be seamlessly interoperable with all the other hypergraph state channels, and also through these things called snapshots. But again, I'm not just going to go into that, okay? Now, the L0 token standard is quite interesting actually because it kind of creates this very, very flexible environment for developers to be able to, you know, create custom tokens and the economics behind those tokens, just like any layer 1 blockchain would, except Constellation have gone one step further and actually said any business that wants to become a state channel, we put you through a 12-week sort of program where we'll teach you guys about decentralized networks and how to run an economy, and you know, completely part of the program, which is fantastic. Okay, so props to Constellation for that as well. It's a really, really good way to kind of you know, interest the mass market when this sort of negative connotations being put on cryptocurrency or decentralized networks. So again, big props to Constellation there. Now, an additional feature that I quite like is every time a state channel is booted up on Constellation, there's actually 10 million DAG tokens that are burnt. So I think the max supply is around 3 or so billion tokens. So it's quite a substantial amount every time a state channel, you know, comes on board. Now, with that said, state channels aren't currently operating to the fullest degree because the network is currently a public network, but it's actually permissioned, meaning you have to obviously be accepted by the Constellation team to become a node, and there's a whitelist sort of form for that, but I think it's actually closed right now, and most of the nodes currently on the network are run by the team or family and friends. Okay, but in saying that as well, I want to actually mention the implementation of fractionalized soft node staking that will actually allow anyone to become a node with a minimum of 10 DAG, which is literally only a couple dollars. Obviously, given you, you know, have the hardware requirements as well and have diminished returns, but more or less, it just further decentralizes the network, which is a feature I really like. So good job on Constellation there. So moving forward now, I think that kind of give you guys the rough idea of how the sort of HGTP works and how it's going to be sort of used to bring their dreams and goals to fruition. Now let's talk a bit about the ecosystem. So there are a few projects right now looking to build on Constellation, okay? One of the most promising ones, in my opinion, is a project called Genico. Now, Genico is awesome because it allows users like you and I to take back control of our healthcare records, kind of like what Constellation is doing on a big data scale, while healthcare is also quite a large industry in its own right. Jenny Co pretty much is going to say, okay, well, if I want to sell my healthcare record, I can do that because that's already being done, right? So we got private practices and also the government records. They're selling our data, our records to, companies looking to, I don't know, do something with it, cancer research, whatever that may be. But they're making heaps of profit on that. So we can now take back that right and either sell our records for profit or obviously remain private. Another one is Alchemy. Alchemy, in my opinion, is almost as good as Jenny Co. It's kind of like bringing the kind of weird exchange between advertisers and end users into a bit of a more equilibrium balance, right? Because right now it's interesting because people trying to advertise are spending hundreds of dollars and there's middlemen involved and they're taking a large cut and these guys aren't getting that great of a return, and the end users, they're stuck with heaps of ads. So Alchemy is trying to sort of resolve the issues relating to between the ad exchange. And there also is another project called Lattice. Now, Lattice is an interesting one because it's actually founded by the same founder on Constellation. His name's Ben Jorgensen. So he is kind of heading both projects. So I guess if you're a bull on Constellation, you probably should also be a bull on Lattice. And Lattice is an interesting project. It's kind of changed its MO over the last few months from what I've been able to observe. However, it's kind of like going to be the all-inclusive package for businesses and users to use on Constellation, right? It's going to have a DEX in there. It kind of is part of that 12-week onboarding process as well. And it's going to have this feature where we see with Multiverse X that the community can come and actually invest into the new startup state channels so that the state channels and businesses won't have to ever worry about trying to find, VCs for their funding rounds, which I quite like, okay? So quite a bit going on in the ecosystem. It's not as large as other projects, I must say, but considering that Constellation is only in the early stages of their mainnet, I think we've got a long way to go, okay? So with that said, now it's time for the highly controversial part, which is the partners, okay? So the partners, a lot of you DAG guys are going to know what I'm going to go to straight away. There's been high controversy in regards to the legitimacy between some of their listed partners, their business partners, right? Because at the moment, there is no real documentation proving that they are an actual partner, or whether it's an NDA, as Constellation says. And sometimes, in some circumstances, Constellation has simply said nothing about a potential partnership and just listed them on their website. Now, I'm not going to go into these and just repeat myself, but what I want to mention is the DoD in particular, the Department of Defense. So yes, you heard me right. The US Department of Defense is currently working with Constellation to bring the Hypergraph Transfer Protocol into fruition, okay? So what's the degree of this? No one really knows for sure. Obviously, working with the DoD, you have to stay tight-lipped because if you don't, there's severe consequences, which probably would lose them a contract if they do have it. So what am I talking about here? Well, essentially, the US government has this sort of program. It's called the SBI grant program, where tech startups from the US are able to receive funding from the SBIR grants in a few different phases to pretty much innovate on technology. And so the government can kind of go, oh, okay, this is a really interesting project. We like what they're doing. Let's give them some money and give them some time and see what they create. And we might actually take that and implement it. And that's what's happened with Constellation, right? They went through the first two phases. The first phase was about 6 months, and there was about $49,000 given to them. They got approved with that round. The second phase came through, same thing, but on a larger scale. So they had 2 years and about $750,000 given to them to develop on whatever they were developing on. And that actually finished about September of 2022. And right now, everyone believes that they're in phase 3. Now, I highly scrutinize Constellation because when I first saw this, I was like, oh, this is a complete, fallacy. We can see they've completed 2 rounds, but there's nothing on the third round, right? But what I want to say is we can definitely see from the SBIR grants that the DoD were the government organization funding them. And also, what people don't realize is phase 3, it's not supposed to be public knowledge, right? You can imagine like China, for example, seeing that they're working with, Constellation's working with the DoD, and they might go and buy up all the supply of Constellation, the DAG tokens, right? So that's a national security risk at that point there, especially if they're going to implement the protocol. So in the sense that they are working with the DoD, I kind of am actually leaning towards the sense that they are right now, and a few people have put one and one together and kind of said that the recent 2 programs that have come out of Constellation, the Universal DLT Toolkit, which is focused towards, secure government organizations with the way that I guess they're onboarded onto Constellation, and also the Iron Spider program. These are kind of programs people are pointing at that are kind of like the direct result of a phase 3 implementation, okay? So what's kind of given it away to me is the fact that Constellation have been so horribly lacking with the community aspect of it, okay? So typically, obviously, a big part of crypto is being able to communicate with the community and bringing retail investors on board, because these are ultimately the end users, right? Well, Constellation's working on such a grand scale that ultimately 10, 20,000 end users in crypto aren't going to make a big difference. Sorry to say it how it is, but that's just a fact, okay? So especially if you are working with the DoD on implementing the hypergraph, or, you know, giving the DoD like this seamless way to bring their organization on as a state channel, why would you want to like update your community on that, or like potentially risk losing such a contract over, you know, cryptic messages and trying to update the community? I think Ben Diggles, which is the CTO, is the main point of contact between the DoD and Constellation. He's trying to bring out as much info as he can, and you can see that, right? But I think Constellation has to stay very tight-lipped in this situation, which is probably why we're not seeing much activity on the GitHub as well. And obviously the Constellation community is left in the dark quite a lot, okay? Now, one potential danger that I think could actually be happening is that Constellation might be actually working on a private network of the HGTP protocol for the DoD or any other government organization, and actually forgetting completely about Constellation DAG itself. Because if you're given a contract with the United States government, which could again be multi-billion dollars, right? Why bother on this project when this is so rewarding for you, okay? We don't know what the team's MO is. We don't know exactly what their intentions are. We don't know how money hungry they are, okay? So these are things that no one can really answer apart from the team. So I think it's either two things. I either think Constellation's hyper-focused on that aspect, and I think Constellation's also just got the actual network right now on the back burner, but are focusing on the bigger enterprise partners to bring this to fruition for the whole world. Okay, so what's my overall opinion? I love the tech. The ecosystem may be very small, but again, it's new. Okay, and there's some promising projects building on it. Again, if you have a safe, secure, and encrypted this kind of like network of networks. I'm kind of stealing Quant Network's like slogan here, but essentially that's what it is, right? It's a big data processor that other networks just simply are unable to do. It's unfeasible for them to do. It's amazing, okay? But at the same time, there is a lot of smoke and mirrors around Constellation and their team, and there's a lot of worries that are circulating within the community itself regarding potential bad actors in the team itself. So again, guys, tread with caution here. I think there's going to be two ways this plays out. Either Constellation goes to a market cap well above any known company today, times 100, or I think it goes to zero. And right now, I'm literally on the fence because it's way too soon for me to be able to tell this. So what I'm doing is actually investing with some money I am 100% expecting to lose. And that's not saying anything against Constellation themselves. I just think the meme itself is going to be good enough to make a bit of money from degens. But as for the overall success of the protocol, it's too early to tell. We're going to have to see. My price prediction for 2025 would be, as long as they don't F up anymore on kind of the community aspect of things or changing too much about the protocol, would be about $3. Okay, so just remember that. It's completely contingent on the way they market themselves. Anyway, guys, with that said, I've waffled on for long enough. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.